Hi there, I'm Angela. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back. If this is your first time here, I'm glad you're here. Thanks for stopping in. Today I have something fun to share with you guys. It's the very first quilt I ever made. Stay tuned. If you saw my previous video, I'm kind of knee deep in pants making for January. That's my goal, at least. So I don't really have too much to share with you guys on that front. Nothing's finished, like far from it. So I was kind of poking around my quilt stash the other day and came on the very first quilt that I ever made. I thought it might be fun to share that with you guys. So I'll pull it off of my lovely assistant. This was a Christmas gift from hubby. I'll have to show that in another video. But here's the quilt. It's small. It measures, I think, 33 by 42, something like that. Unfortunately, I can't get far enough away to show you the entire quilt at once, but you can kind of see that it's pretty uniform. It's basically, there's a solid color back, or it's not a solid color. There's a slight little texture-y print to the fabric, but it almost reads like a solid. It's basically 2-inch squares surrounded by a few borders. And the way that this came about, so back in when I started sewing, I was really more into making home dec items for my apartment, and then a little bit later I got into making clothing. And I was working at a fabric store at that time, and one of the requirements to work there was that you occasionally had to make items that we would use for display in the store, either to showcase certain fabrics or patterns that they were promoting. So it could be you could make an article of clothing or maybe a craft type item, and I did make a number of clothing articles that way. So the way that it worked was the store would furnish all the materials that you need to make the item. Then you would have a certain time period to make it. I can't remember how long we would get to make it, maybe a couple of weeks, something like that. And then the item would have to hang in the store on display for, I think it was around 2 months. But then after that, you could keep the item. So it was a pretty good deal. And mostly I made clothing items and a couple little crafts. But for some reason, this quilting pattern caught my eye. And this was a pattern. I think it was one of the big four. It might have been a McCall's pattern. Even though now that I've got a number of quilts under my belt, it's not even something you'd really need a pattern for. It's so basic and simple. But anyway, I thought, well, this looks kind of interesting, and I really loved these fabrics so much, and I thought they would be cute in this quilt. So I offered to make this, and I did. And then that was that. I went back to just sewing clothing and home decor. It's not like the quilting bug bit me hard at that time. In fact, it wasn't until much later that I really started getting into quilting, like 2010 actually. And the reason that I know the exact year that that the quilting bug did bite me and I got into it very heavily was because the second quilt that I made, the one in 2010, was for my little nephew. And at that time, he was somewhere between 2 and 3 years old. He might have been closer to 3 years old. And I saw this really cute Yogi Bear print. It was a whole collection of Yogi Bear related quilting cottons. And I just was inspired to make a quilt for him. So I did that, and I had so much fun making that quilt that I really started to get into quilting. And I still do a lot of garment sewing, of course, too. But now that's been a number of years, so it'll be going on 12 years that I kind of got back into quilting and really started getting into it. And I finished 5 quilts, which is probably not a lot for all of you avid quilters out there, but I also have 3 others in various stages of completion. So I hope to get those finished up this year. We all know about those dreaded UFOs. So I will put a couple of pictures of that Yogi Bear quilt up so you can see that. I had so much fun making that quilt. I think I just loved the whole theme of it. And when it came time to do the actual quilting on the Yogi Bear quilt, I took a class at one of the local quilt shops in my area. Just I felt like that would be very helpful because I wasn't really used to machine quilting or quilting of any sort at that time. Piecing was a little bit more familiar, just being an avid sewist. When you're sewing clothes, you are just essentially piecing, although you're piecing to your body, different shapes. But making a quilt top, in some ways it's a little bit more precise than sewing clothing. You have to get those 1/4 inch seams just right so that everything matches up. So I was not as intimidated with the piecing, but the quilting was a different story. I just wanted to make sure I was doing it right. So I took a class, and it was really helpful, and I ended up making a really good friend there. And even though she and I, we live about an hour apart from each other, so we're not real close, but we occasionally do still get together. And actually during 2021, we made a quilt together. I say together, we FaceTimed every month, sometimes every 2 or 3 weeks. So we each did the same quilt on our own. Like she made a quilt, I used the same pattern and made my own quilt with the same pattern. It was a block of the month pattern. So it kind of kept us in tune with each other, in touch and engaged, and we would get on FaceTime and just share pictures of our progress and get information or gauge each other's level of interest and maybe get ideas or inspiration from each other. Inspiration, that's the word I'm looking for. Or like, what do you think about this color for the sashing and things like that. So it was really fun doing a long distance quilt along together. And that's pretty much all I have today. And I hope the next time I come to you, I will have an update on at least one of the pairs of pants that's on my project list for January. And until next time, thanks for watching. Bye.